welcome to Film Strip. These podcasts are spoiler-filled as we discuss the plots, characters, and themes of the films in review. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.
Welcome to Film Strip. I'm Jay.
And I'm Brian.
And this is our review of Back to the Future, starring Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, Lea Thompson, Thomas F. Wilson, and Crispin Glover. Directed by Robert Zemeckis, released in 1985 on a budget of $19 million, grossed $388 million at the box office. Brian, I think this has been on your Film Strip short list since we started the podcast, man.
It absolutely. I mean, who doesn't want to review one of the classic 80s movies of all time? I mean, this is one of those movies that from the 80s that stands up to this day and you can watch and enjoy. You don't even have to be in the moment. Like, a lot of these 80s movies we see are so dated to the time.
Yes.
And while you got some of that in here with, you know, cars and dresses and all that stuff, it's cool because it goes back even further into the 50s and you see all that kind of stuff. So it stands up today, if you ask me. I really enjoy this movie, so I was always wanting to do this.
And to be fair, this is the second time we tried to do it.
It is.
We did record this episode years ago, and my half of the audio just went kaperts. Like, I think you still have whatever you said.
I have my half of the audio still, but it does no good now.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was a lot. I think you only had 2 kids back then. And,
probably. If that's the case, that would be 7 years.
Yeah, easily, man. I can believe it. It's one of those great lost episodes that we talk about from Film Strip, like American Pie with Anna. Just lost to the ether. You know, one of the funniest things y'all will never hear because it's just gone. But no, man, Back to the Future. You talk about like revisiting 80s movies and how well they hold up. You know, Nick and I did St. Elmo's Fire back in December, and that definitely does not hold up in terms of like being today, but it is the epitome of the yuppie 80s, if you want to talk about that. And, you know, the funny thing is, man, even about this one, even though I know this movie's 1985, I never think about this as an 80s movie. And I think it's because the story is about so much else, and we'll get into that as we go. But when did you first see this? Did you see this in 85 when it came out in theaters?
I don't think so. I mean, that I would have only been 7 or 8 at the time if I'd seen it in the theater, so I don't believe I did. I think we watched it as kids, but it was a couple years probably after the fact and on VHS rental type thing. And I fell in love with it as a kid, just really enjoyed it. And it was one of those things that we would rent from time to time, just over and over again because we really liked it. And then, of course, once the second and the third one come out later, we've had copies since then. And still to this day, I mean, I think I bought the 3 DVD set when it came out. I've got the Blu-ray set now when it came out. So, I mean, it's one of those franchises we just really love.
Yeah. 1985, I've told part of this story before back on the Halloween retrospective. If people want to go back and revisit that. But, you know, I had the bicycle accident when I was a kid, all that stuff. This came out the summer I was recovering from that. So this was the first movie I went and saw in a theater when I finally got out of my cast and all of that jazz. And even as a kid at that age, 8 years old, I was loved going to the movies with my folks. It was kind of a thing that we all did together. And my parents had heard everybody talking about this movie. And I was like, I don't really, I kind of was aware of who Michael J. Fox was. I didn't know who Christopher Lloyd was. But I was like, I don't know, Alex Keaton, I could kind of take or leave that. Like, I hated Family Ties. It was just not my show, right? I think it was more for like my brother's age. But they had heard so much about it, and they're like, it looks fun, and I saw the words, though, that sold me. It was Steven Spielberg, who is executive producer on this, which basically his job was to run interference with the studio because Zemeckis is his buddy. So, and I know that now, but at the time, all I knew was like, ooh, Spielberg, because, that was E.T. and Jaws and every other cool thing I liked, Raiders of the Lost Ark. And so I remember going to see this first movie I saw in theaters coming out of that the summer of surgery, I guess I'd call it. And I was blown away. I mean, just ate it up. I think we saw it twice in theaters and then taped it off like a Showtime or something and just wore the VHS out through the years. And, I talked about it with my friends. This is one of the rare franchises where I've seen every movie in the theater. multiple times. I saw all of them at least twice in the theater at some time or another, because it was just a big part of growing up. And being a part of this and like playing it on the playground and stuff and just being fascinated by the whole idea and the DeLorean and all that stuff. And it's stuck with me for years. And it's probably been 10 years since I watched the sequels, but maybe once a year or so, this will pop up on a streaming service or something, or I'll just go find it and watch it. It's been something that I've spent time with now for all these years. And it's fun to go back and do those on this show because we've had a lot of experience doing that now through the years, where for a long time I was afraid to go back and do stuff that you just love when you're a kid because there's always that fear of like, oh, I'm going to watch that and it's going to be awful. and
which happens.
Yes, it does happen. But we kind of struck gold with most of this that at least I've been a part of. But yeah, this is a big one, man, all along the way. And I mean, I have a feeling like the popcorn ratings kind of telegraph themselves on this. But what's fun about this for me is to revisit it and just think about what the movie's trying to say and that it actually has a point. And it's kind of a simple point. But I think it's neat that the whole impetus of this was that the co-writer, Bob Gale, was thumbing through some of his dad's stuff and found his dad's high school yearbook. And apparently, like, his dad never talked about growing up or anything with him because he was like, my dad was the high school president. I didn't know that. I started looking at the stuff he was involved in, and I've been like, I would not have been friends with my dad. That's what he said. And he got to thinking about that. Well, yeah, what would it be like for, a kid in the 1980s to go back and meet their parents, and how would that work? And then just over 7 years, him and Robert Zemeckis just kind of messed with this script. And I mean, they had it optioned for a long time, and it just took forever to finally, come to fruition. But I think it's neat that it's one of those things that they just worked on. And I mean, Gale's written a lot of stuff, but this is definitely the thing that he is most known for. And in a lot of ways, it launched Robert Zemeckis into this, stratosphere of a career that he's had as a director. I mean, he's an Academy Award winning director. He's done good stuff. He's done some not so great stuff too, but he's produced a lot of hits too. And, is a really, he's got a lot of the Spielberg touch with the way the camera works and all that stuff. And you can kind of feel it on this movie, and so it's neat to hear them tell the backstory of it, but that it's just as simple as like, would I have been friends with my dad in high school? Well, I guess we should do a plot summary here, Brian, and see how it goes.
Marty McFly is a teenager in Hill Valley, California, who wishes more than just about anything that he could rise above his family's status in town. His father, George, is a wimp still bullied by high school classmate Biff Tannen. His siblings are working dead-end jobs, and his mother, Lorraine, is an alcoholic. He doesn't handle rejection well and is often at odds with the school principal. Marty has two friends, his girlfriend, Jennifer, and Doc Brown, an eccentric inventor-scientist who has squandered his family's fortune to realize his own dream of inventing a time machine. Marty agrees to meet Doc to see his new invention in action, and wow, does it work. It's built on the body of a 1981 DeLorean stainless steel chassis and fueled by plutonium that Doc ripped off from Libyan nationalists who he promised to build a bomb for, but gave them used pinball machine parts. When they show up and shoot Doc, Marty takes off in the DeLorean, which Doc has set to 1955 in a demonstration, and Marty reaches the speed to travel back in time, 88 miles per hour. Back in 1955 Hill Valley, Marty desperately tries to find Doc to get back home, but bumps into his parents, who haven't officially met yet. Things get complicated when Lorraine falls for Marty for the same reason she fell for George. Her father accidentally hit him with a car. Marty coaches his future dad to go out after Lorraine while ducking and dodging Biff. Through many misadventures and hijinks, Marty and Doc find a way to get the time machine powered up for a trip back home, depending on a lightning strike and a mountain of luck. George knocks out Biff, finally kisses Lorraine at the big dance, the moment the future selves had earlier revealed when they fell in love. Marty tries to give Doc a letter of warning him of his fate, but Doc will hear none of it. Marty is able to race to the car in time for the lightning strike and sets the time machine back to arrive back a few minutes earlier so he can save Doc. In spite of this, Marty arrives just in time to see Doc shot again and to see himself vanish into the past as the time machine goes back to 1955. As he cries, Doc sits up, revealing he decided it was worth the roll of the dice to read Marty's letter and wore a flak jacket which saved his life. Marty wakes up the next morning in his old house, but with a very different family. His father is a success and even wrote a novel. His mother is no longer an alcoholic. His siblings are also leading successful lives. And Biff is a car detailer, very scared of George. Jennifer shows up to see Marty's new truck when Doc returns from the future because something has to be done about your kids. Marty, Jennifer, and Doc take off in a now flying version of the time machine as credits roll.
Yeah, it's a good plot summary. It's a little more detailed than maybe what we normally do, but I think it was good to hit all of that to just see how much is crammed into this thing, man. Because a lot of times the thing about this movie that people remember and have talked about, particularly like in film Twitter circles and stuff, is like that it's the perfect screenplay, right? Everything that's set up pays off somewhere between the first and the third act, and that's true. But what I find neat is that while it might be the perfect like setup and payoff screenplay, it's got one thing in it that is very unique. The main character has no arc at all. Marty is the same guy at the end that he is at the beginning. It's just all of his wish fulfillment happens for him. And that's a delicate thing to do. And the director and people that put this together knew that too. And it would take somebody that had the kind of comic timing that Michael J. Fox has to be able to pull that off. Because otherwise Marty would come off like a real jerk.
But yeah, and the fact that he comes off as kind of the slacker of the family, right? I mean, his brother and sister are in these successful jobs, and he's like dressed down as a kind of a dope in the house. It's kind of like, maybe you should have wished yourself to be a little smarter too.
Right, yeah, we'll have to talk about all the time travel-y stuff and unraveling, but I think it's neat to see how this thing starts. And even as a kid, man, before I started playing guitar, this opening was something that I was like, is this what playing guitar is all about? Because it's that great tracking shot where you get all this data dump of information. I mean, you see Doc's lab, you see all of his little weird inventions, you see the clocks all going. You hear about the plutonium getting stolen on the news. Same newscaster, by the way, that's in the Die Hard movies, by the way. So this is now in the same universe as Die Hard. I just want everybody to realize that. And so John McClane could have arrested Marty at some point in his life, but because Hill Valley can't be far from L.A. But he's in there and he's kicking the skateboard around, and he hooks up that little mini guitar to that humongo wall-sized speaker, right, and just cranks it to 11 and blows himself up.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. And I probably would have saw this right around the time where I was just starting to learn guitar myself, so it was probably just acoustic at the time, so I'd never seen anything like that before, definitely. But pretty cool, and also kind of like, dang, dude. One chord and you're
right
halfway across the room.
Listen, man, years later, I bought a stainless steel guitar pick just for that reason. Like that, I was like, I've got to have one of those, even though it sounds like garbage when you try to play with one. I was like, I've got to have one because it's the Marty McFly thing, And I think the guy even in the music store was like, yeah, Back to the Future sells a lot of these, even in the 90s at that point. But no, I do like the economical way that the film starts to give us all that info. I mean, in the first 10 minutes, you learn everything you need to know about Marty. You get to see him, slacking off. And then you see him, you realize, when Doc calls him that, all the clocks are slow. And he's like, I'm late for school. And he's got to get to school. And man, I thought, could you actually do this? Could you skateboard by hitching rides on the back of people's vehicles? I don't know that is a good idea.
I think it's a terrible idea. I've never seen anyone try this before, and hopefully people never did. I would imagine a ton of people probably tried it after this movie came out. I don't know if it was really a thing. Maybe in California it was a thing that they did, but definitely not around here. You don't want to do that. That's a bad idea.
No, and even where I was in Alabama, man, you just don't trust the way people drive. There's no way, But I think the other thing you get is that it's maybe even just as iconic as this movie is. You get the Huey Lewis song, "Power of Love," which Huey Lewis talks about as the greatest piece of marketing ever invented, because the song came out months before the movie did, and then led up to this big move for the movie. Then the movie was a hit, and then the movie took the song overseas and made Huey Lewis and the News this unreal band. I mean, they're basically just a bar band. They're kind of the forerunners to Hootie and the Blowfish, and that kicking song, it kind of drives the whole narrative there. And I it's one thing I miss about 80s is that there was a song, right? Like even St. Elmo's Fire is a cheese song, but it's a great song for that movie. And I remember Power of Love, and I just have like all these Back to the Future images when I hear that song.
There's certain songs that are just so iconic to certain films, and that's definitely one of them. I love how they did it too, having it be the theme to start, and then also you see Marty's band play it at the little talent show rehearsal. And I love the fact that Huey Lewis is in the judging panel and is the one who says, "That's just too loud." It's too loud.
Yeah. Yeah, they play like the metal version of Power of Love. It's like this ripping guitar part. It doesn't fit the song at all, but it's I think I dreamed about being in bands in high school and in college that could try out for the big dance and all that stuff, And I did play once with some friends at like a thrown together talent show thing in high school, and we purposely played the loudest stuff we could come up with just so we could be annoying like that. Like we were jamming out on the same idea. So it's a neat little cameo with Huey Lewis there. But you get all about Marty and all of his insecurity. Right? Like he cannot handle rejection. He thinks his father's a loser. He's never going to go anywhere in life. What's he going to do? And his girlfriend's trying to cheer him up, right? And this is every teenage boy's problem, right? Because like from the time you're 12 to you're like 25, you're basically like 2 steps from dragging your knuckles in the ground. Like you're barely a functioning human being as a man. Women are way much more mature. You've got way ahead on us there. And that's what usually keeps us together, until we kind of figure life out. And I love how Jennifer is just so like is supportive girlfriend, but it's also like kicking him in the butt. Like, stop feeling sorry for yourself, girl. I really like Claudia Schiffer here, and it's a shame she wasn't able to come back for the sequels, and there's a good reason why she couldn't. But I liked her, even though she's just a small part in this. But you get a lot from her early on.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I remember the first thing I thought of was the new character. I think it was Elizabeth Shue who took over for her, right? And in the second going, wait, that's not the same girl. But anyway, yeah, she's a great character. I mean, like you said, she's really trying to motivate him. Like, get your tape to the record company. I think you're going to do fine. Well, I can't handle if they tell me I suck, blah, 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 which I love that comes back, later in the film too, that same line, which was perfect. But, yeah, she's just like, come on, let's go. Let's get this going. And of course they're, out by the, old clock tower chatting it up and about to get the kiss. And then Dad shows up and she's got to go. She gives him the old note on the back of the Save the Clock Tower piece. And I thought it was good. I like her character a lot. I mean, she's not in here a whole lot, right? I mean, she's at the beginning and at the end, and she'll get used a little bit more in the second one, but yeah. But she's a critical character for him.
Yeah, but she's there to again reinforce the fact that Marty has. What's interesting is he has the same self-confidence issues his father has, that he'll actually go get to see. But you talked about it, that he, his father writes a lot, and he asks me like, "You ever get that stuff published?" He's like, "Oh no, I couldn't deal with it if somebody told me it wasn't any good." And it's like, "Oh wow, I'm reliving. Like, I don't think I'm anything like my dad, but I'm exactly reliving his life." Yeah. And yeah, exactly. And you get the whole bit about the clock tower and the Save the Clock, which this has got to be the worst piece of civic engagement ever. The thing got struck by lightning 30 years ago. It hasn't worked, and there's people that want to keep it that way.
Yeah, I mean, look at Hill Valley. It's a dump, right? I love the mayor truck coming by, right? Mayor is it Gordy? Goldie. That's
Goldie,
it, yes.
Wilson.
If you want progress and prosperity, vote re-elect Mayor Goldie. And I love the fact that when we go back to 1955, it's a different guy with the same thing. The truck going around with the same exact message, just hilarious. But yeah, what a crappy way to fundraise for that thing.
Well, in the 50s, Hill Valley was this sort of
up and coming,
sprawling community that was just growing. And now in the 80s, it's kind of hit what it's going to be. It's just suburbia, it's just, it's got a Burger King and there's a mall and, it's got what you need, but it's not it's not a destination place that people are moving to. There's no economic council of Hill Valley that holds meetings like where I live here in Charlotte talking about like, how can we attract more outside talent? Like nobody's doing that in Hill Valley, and they wouldn't want to anyway, because come and see our broken clock tower, which, I mean, it's funny though, but I love the joke of that because I grew up in a town in North Alabama that reminded me a lot of Hill Valley, even though it was in North Alabama, that was very much about like keep things exactly the way that they were in 1962 and never let it change. And obviously you can't live like that, right? You can't do that.
And I grew up in a small town too where everything was the same, and it's finally changing now. I mean, many, many years later, but the library was always over here. There's always a general store here. There's always, this is going to be here, and we're not going to take anything down. It took many, many years for them to start allowing, like, the McDonald's was the big thing, right? When the McDonald's came in, that was huge because they fought. Like, people fought this thing coming in. They didn't want it, and they're like, well, we're going to have jobs for our kids and blah, blah, blah. No, we can't allow this big corporate machine to come in here. We got the Dairy Queen, right? They're going to run the Dairy Queen out of business. And that was the thing.
which is also a big,
but it's more of a local, right? I mean, McDonald's is nation. This is more localized. It started in Minnesota, so we got pride in that, right? That kind of thing.
Right. Well, that's like when Walmart came to town, man. Like half the people liked it, and half the people were pissed. I mean, that moved in, and now like they pop them up everywhere, and everybody just complains about the traffic.
Yeah,
that's the thing nowadays. But it's funny to think about that. You see this happening, and you got to realize that the whole premise of this movie is like, let's take the kind of adorable but total loser kid who lives in a loser town, and let's put him in this grand adventure.
Yeah, what the heck?
Why not? I mean, it's everybody can relate to it though, because you and I are sitting there doing it, right? And you get him to go home at night, and we get to meet the rest of the McFlys. Of course, there's the wrecked car situation, and Biff and his dad. And I got to say, man, like for me, the thing that holds this movie so well in terms of the comedy, it's Thomas F. Wilson as Biff is such a joy playing like the biggest a-hole in the world. And I knew people like this, like growing up. I was like, he's like Biff, And just the guy who definitely peaked around 11th grade, and it never got any better than that summer, and it's just, he's living that every minute and torturing poor George and weirdo Crispin Glover doing all this stuff. There's so much stuff going on with that when you meet the whole McFly family at home there, and it's all about the wrecked car, and it's Biff's fault, but he blames it on George somehow, who goes along with
George is a pushover, right? I mean, he'll do anything. I like how he didn't have his reports done, right? Because Biff's his boss now, so he doesn't have his reports done. And then later he doesn't have his homework done back in 1955. So, I mean, you see the character. Biff is a great character, and he's a great character throughout this whole series. All three of them, I think he's probably one of the highlight characters in there. Just the different things that he does with that character, going from, this bully to going to the kind of like sheepish character that he becomes, going to the rich guy, back to the all this. I mean, he just does a great job, and I like the character of Biff a lot. And I think, but if we look at the other characters in the McFly family, I mean, we don't really care much about the sister but I did like the line that they dropped where she was talking about going to some dance, and the mom's like, "Oh, you can't do that. That boys are bad. I never was in a car with a boy by myself, right?" And then later on, it pays off where she's like, "What's wrong, Marty? It's not like I've never been in a car with a boy before. What?"
Right. They write the Leah Thompson character Lorraine, which, by the way, heck of a job making a 23-year-old woman look like a 45-year-old alcoholic. Like that's some great makeup. But and for the 80s, and for it to still hold up is a testament to how good it works. And it wasn't like they were working on hundreds of millions of dollars. It was cheap, but they made it work. But it's also the performance, and this is how you know Leah Thompson's a good actress. Is she can play both of those. And what's funny is that you go back and you find out your dad was the same loser that you are, and your mom was the school slut.
I don't know if she was the school slut,
like,
but wow. I think she was more of the a lot different than what you were told, right? She was a little more liberal than maybe she leads on.
Well, isn't that the joke, though? That like the people that banged the drum for like don't drink and swear and have sex and be with boys are the people who did that when they were in school. So, I mean, you said yourself your dad was a troublemaker. I bet he was hard on y'all to not get in trouble.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yep, that's true.
Yeah, because he's seen it, right? So, yeah, I mean, that's funny that you see the parents do that. But that's a good joke. And it's neat to watch the family dynamics. You get the older brother who works at Burger King, and he's got to go do the midnight shift. So, and then you got the sister who's just basically waiting for a boy to call her, and she's rolling her hair at the table or whatever. And there's all this family dynamic going on. And you realize, like, you look, and it's all in Michael J. Fox's face, and I really give him a lot of credit for portraying this, is that he has got to get over that I don't hate these people. I love them. They're my family. I just wish they weren't so lousy.
Yes.
And I wish we weren't so just pushovers. I mean, the principal says it to him in the hall when he busts him for being tardy, is that none of your family's ever amounted to anything, and they never will. Yeah, you're just another slacker. And the thing is, though, Strickland's not wrong. Marty is a huge slacker. I mean, he really is. And you called it out when he comes back to his new life. He definitely looks like the slacker, because he's the baby, right? You get away with that. But the whole thing is to set us up, though, to get us to the mall to meet Doc. And I gotta say, man, I mean, again, I didn't know who Christopher Lloyd was at the time. I've now seen stuff he's done before, of course, many things he's done after. What a great character actor. And just a great comedian to play this Alfred Einstein kind of wacko, tour guide through life that he gets to play in this movie. And when we meet Doc, it's totally not what you expect. That DeLorean comes pulling out of that truck, and it's like, oh, it's the coolest thing. And then the goofiest dude ever, like lanky and everything, gets out of that car. And it's perfect that he's like 2 feet taller than Michael J. Fox. And but he's just kind of running around. He's got 7 or 8 pins sticking out of different places, and he's just, he's like, he's what you'd think the wild scientist.
Yeah, I mean, right? I love his just over expressionism to everything. Like, oh goodness, great Scott, how did I not think of this? I mean, just and my favorite thing is the gigawatt thing. I don't know why. It just. Every time he says it, I just start rolling on wherever I'm at, laughing. Gigawatt, that's hilarious.
Listen, as the son of a power worker, I got the whole rundown of let me just tell you how that would not work. But it was funny. But even my dad found that funny. That the way he's just freaking out about that. And later in the movie, when we meet Doc, it's so cool because we get all the data dump. They spend time walking us through. Here's how the time machine works. And they don't waste any time on plausibility or any of that. It's just hey, this stainless steel body works, and I figure, if you're going to blow all your money on a time machine, at least get a cool car out of it. And it's got all this gear. He shows him how he sets this and that, and you turn this, and you just, you got to do this. And then they send the dog back in time, or they send it forward in time, a minute, right? And you get that great moment where the DeLorean is in front of them and they're standing there. And I love Michael J. Fox has got the big, humongous video camera up, and he just starts to inch away. I'm not going to get run over by this car, right? And the car comes and it disappears in front of him. And you get that great line, 88 miles an hour, because he's serious, beep, and then here comes the car. And those cool flame lines. I mean, I think that was the thing every kid remembered that I talked to about this was, oh, man, I want a car that goes so fast that it just leaves fire behind it.
Yeah, that was the coolest effect. And I got to tell you, too, as a kid watching this for the first time, seeing the doors open like that, I'd never seen a car do that before. So that was, I was like,
the
I want a
gull-wing
car like
doors.
that, you know? And of course, you get the Lamborghini or something. But, yeah, that was cool. I also really, really like when it comes back, it's like just covered in ice. Right, it's so cold because it's traveled so fast through time, and just Doc, when he goes up to touch it, he's like, "Oh," and then he's like, "What? Too hot? No, it's cold." He uses his foot to open the car door.
Yeah, it's like the thing you don't expect. Yeah, right. And so they're playing around. The dog is fine and is. And everything, and they're doing, and he's starting to explain all of it, and that's where we get the whole drop about it's plutonium, and I ripped it off from some Libyans. Now that feels very 80s because that was very much the Gaddafi, and all of that was in our minds. We were about to do some skirmishing with them, as we'll say. Here on the show, and so that was something that you got to have Middle Eastern bad guys. That would be the ones to go to at this point. And I love that Doc's whole thing was like, well, I just built him a bomb with a bunch of pinball machine parts in it, and I'm like they're not going to figure that out real quick. So here they come in their VW conversion van, which is awesome. And, it's the big chase. And you see Doc get shot. And, I mean, that, to me, like, as a kid, blew my mind. Because I thought, here's this main character, and he's just gone now. And the kid does what every kid would do, right? You jump in the car and hit the gas.
He tries to get away at first, right? And totally fails. But the guy's gun gets jammed. And that's when he's able to jump in the car and get out of there. But what happened to Einstein? Where did he go?
He went into the truck and just was hanging out, I guess. Yeah, I mean, that last I saw, he jumped in the truck, and that was it. And good old the good old AK-47, sometimes known to catch a round in the wrong place and jam up. So it gives him just enough time to jump in the car and drive off. And then we do get a great chase scene. And we got to say too, though, that the music in this is amazing. The way that the score just thumps throughout every bit of it and leads us down this whole journey. It's not John Williams, but it feels like it, right? Because it's telling you part of the story as the whole movie's unfolding, and Marty's just flying around that parking lot, and he's trying to get away from the Libyans. And what's neat, and this is some just smart filmmaking, is you see Marty driving, and he throws the gear back, which my parents had a standard shift car, and that's what my brother learned how to drive on. That's what I learned how to drive on. And watching my brother speed shift, I just could think about, Michael J. Fox dropping that down to the fourth, and he hits the circuits and turns them on. And it's almost like he doesn't realize what he's done.
He has no clue.
Right? Yeah. Yeah, and so you've got Alan Silvestri's score just pumping behind you, and he hits 88, and then all of the magic starts to happen around him. It's almost like the look on his face is like, I don't realize what's happening to me, and he doesn't really know. And I think that's the cool part is Marty does not choose to go back in time. It just happens to him. And that's what's
I
funny.
agree, and you're totally right. He has no clue what happened. He was getting chased by these Libyans, and all of a sudden he's in the middle of nowhere. And it isn't until he gets out of the car and starts looking around that he sees the Lions estates. The same entrance beams that are in there now, but nothing behind it. Nothing but a road.
Yeah, it's a development. Yeah, like you realize how close he lives to the mall too, because he's on the farmer's land.
The best.
That the crazy guy trying to breed the pine trees. He runs over one of them, lands in his barn, and he realizes that once he gets out of there, that wait a minute, I just drove over where the mall is now, but it used to just be farmland.
And I love how they set that up too, with Doc telling him about how the old man used to grow pine trees out here and this and that, and this used to be a big farm, and they set it all up beforehand, and then boom, there we are in the middle of that field in their barn. I love the family's reaction. Like, right? What is this?
Yeah. The kid's got the space comic book, and he's from outer space, and the dad trying to shoot at him with the shotgun, and it's awesome. I mean, it's funny, because it's all played for humor, and you've got Marty, of course, in the big hazmat nuclear suit, and he looks like the spaceman from outer space that the kid's talking about, and so he tears out of there, like you say. and goes by his old neighborhood because it's daylight finally, and he jams the brakes.
No, he runs out of gas.
And that's what, yeah, he runs out of gas. There's no fuel. There's nothing left in the car. And he's like, oh, okay. So he has to park the car and he just hikes it into town. And what we get to spend the next 4 or 5 minutes doing is watching Marty tool around the same town square where he grew up or where he lives, but it's all shiny and new and it's all 50s. And it's blowing his mind, right? It's some good filmmaking and storytelling though, with all the dress and you got the ballad of Davy Crockett playing in the background instead of, Sheena Easton or whatever it was before. And he's picking up newspapers and all this stuff. And he can't believe what he's seeing. It's the same town, but it's not.
I love how everyone in town thinks he's a sailor, too, because he's got this vest on that looks like a life jacket to them. So, whoa, you coming in from port? And he has no clue what they're talking about. He goes into the 50s diner and sits down and he's asking questions. And the diner, the tender behind the diner is hilarious. It's like, are you going to order anything? Like, I ain't giving you information for free, Oh yeah, I'll take a Pepsi free,
No, remember those, right? That didn't. Yeah, I remember that drink though.
Yeah, back when it was Pepsi. Awful. Yeah,
but yeah, well, it was not a good drink. But yeah, he had that, and you meet Goldie Wilson when he's just he's basically a kid, and he's just mopping up, and it's the joke of like, I'm gonna be mayor and all this stuff, and but the big thing is you meet George McFly. And we talk about him much in the intro, but we got to talk about Crispin Glover. This is a strange dude, all right? Makes some really strange acting choices, but may have been the just one of the great pieces of casting in this movie to get like just that overwrought sense of emotion that he talks with and does every line with. And he's just so nerdy, but he's desperately trying to be cool, but he just can't. And I don't know. I loved it. I thought him and Michael J. Fox across from each other, and then him and Thomas F. Wilson when Biff's picking on him, just have great chemistry together.
That's one of the big things of this movie is that everybody who worked together had really good chemistry in all the scenes. Like, I don't think there's a badly acted scene in this whole movie as far as the dialogue and how they get it across well. Everything looks relatable, right? Like you can believe this is how this was and how they act and all that stuff. And I love the scene where they're in there and Marty recognizes his dad and he's just staring at him, and George is just like getting all tensed up, like, what the hell? You got a problem? And
yeah,
you're George McFly. Yeah.
It doesn't know. And then here comes Biff and his crew. I mean, you gotta love it that he's got minions.
Oh, absolutely. He has to have minions,
that
right?
Follow him around. Right, yeah, a guy like that would have him in high school. The bully would have him, and he's this, and Thomas F. Wilson again is kind of a big guy. He's a big buff guy, and he's of course a lot bigger than Michael J. Fox and Crispin Glover, and so again by Hollywood standards, he's 6'1", so he's a giant on screen. So you see him, and he comes in, he's got the flat top and the whole bit. And what's something that dawned on me watching this time that I guess I just never had an appreciation for is how young everybody in this movie is compared to like all the adults are the same age as the kid lead actors, Michael J. Fox. They're all around the same age. And it's like, man, they're all in their early 20s and they're just, you can tell like this is their first thing for a lot of them. I think Leah Thompson had been in a couple of movies at this point. Thomas F. Wilson had done like random stuff. And I mean, he had a heck of a 1985. He had this and April's Fool's Day. Guess which one everybody remembers? And so, and then Crispin Glover kind of came out of nowhere. Michael J. Fox was a TV star and had done a movie or two, but had never done this. And everything just kind of came from, but it's neat to watch them work together. And you watch all the dynamics too. And you also realize that even though Marty is a lot like his dad or does a lot of the same things as his dad, he's also not like his dad, and that he will throw a punch. He will get in the mix of it and will scrap if he has to, because I guess because of growing up the kid of a slacker and being told that your whole life, you kind of have to fight. And he's also, if you noticed, he's the smallest one in the family too. So he's had to kind of fight for it.
Yeah, I like that too. I mean, you could tell there's so much similarities between George and Marty, but then, like you said, Marty has a little more of a temper, I guess you could say, and lets it get to him, where George keeps it buried, right? He won't allow it to come up. Not yet anyway, right? It takes a while.
Well, he hasn't been anybody teach him to do it. That's the thing, is you never get a sense of who George's parents are or anything like that, and they're not even like part of the story. Lorraine's family kind of is part of the story, but his folks, you know nothing about them, and you never even meet them. I don't think so. The whole time, and yeah, and what you realize is that they are almost no influence on him. You know, that he's just kind of the weird kid, and whatever, grow up and go do something with yourself. You know, he's sort of left to his own devices, and he's everybody to relate to. And Marty becomes his best friend. Over the course of about 6 days,
George
that they know each other.
On the fence about this Marty guy who keeps following him everywhere he goes, right?
Yeah, for a while, yeah. I'm talking about over the course of the film they do. But yeah, at first he's like, I don't know who you are, you need to leave me alone. But I love this, though, that we start meeting people and we get the little setup, because the sister, Wendy Jo Sperber, was the actress, and she's long since gone, but was a real funny actress and did a lot of comedy stuff. She would have been somebody that would have been like on Second City and SNL. That was her kind of thing. And she gets the great bit at the dinner table early, like, it was so stupid, Grandpa hit him with the car, and like she just blows out the whole parents meeting story, that it's, I know the fish under the sea, that, whatever, and she's just sort of over all of it, and what you see is all the things that she kind of blew off that Mom is sort of still romanticizing in some way, you get to see happen to Marty now instead of his dad. And we find out the reason his dad was there was because he was a peeping
really
Tom.
Good. Yes, that was awesome. But I as someone who probably has heard this story a bajillion times, knows all about it, knows what has to happen for him to save his dad from getting hit by the car. It's kind of like, what are you doing? He's caught in the moment.
Well, yeah, but it's one of those in the moment things. You don't think about it. And you see it come to him later, going like, he when he's telling Doc later, it's like, her dad hit him with the car. He hit me with the car. and he realizes, like, oh no, I've now intervened into the timeline. And I think that's the other thing about this movie that is, it's one of those things that, like, if you start pulling at the threads of it too much, Brian, it'll completely unravel at some point. But it's sort of fun to pick out a little bit the time travel rules and things in this and how it works, because what we'll do, what really gets the clock ticking, obviously Marty wants to get back home. So you got two ticking clocks. You got the, when he finally meets Doc and they figure out the whole 1.21 gigawatt problem, we'll talk about in a second. Well, we got to get to the lightning strike of Saturday at the dance. Okay, so we got that, but also his family, like his brother and his sister in a photo he's got, start to slowly disappear because he has intervened into their life and what it would be. And the whole idea of, like, if you could go back and change something in history, well, there's ripple effects to that, right? And I love that they sort of open up the Pandora's box of the butterfly effect, but they don't bother to really explain any of it either, because that would not be what this movie is about.
I mean, they semi-explain it. I mean, Doc does give an explanation to him of why. I love it. Doc, when he first sees the photo, what is wrong with your brother? His hand is missing, Then he finally figures it out, and they understand. The more he interferes with the time, the more he disappears from the future. And so that's where we're getting at with that. And they do, I thought they explained it okay. They don't go into depth on it, no, but I think it was easy to pick up on what was going on, either way. But, it's just, I like that plot piece, because then you have something to look at. And again, you see, the phone number on the back of the paper starts disappearing because he's not going to meet her anymore,
Right.
Right.
Because he doesn't exist.
So, but that paper then comes in handy, because that's how Doc knows there's going to be a lightning strike on Saturday night at 10:04. We need to use that power to get the amount we need to get the time travel going.
Well, we got to talk about how he meets Doc too. So he finally, he basically gets assaulted by his mother at her home. Like let's gloss over that and the weirdness that is at dinner and all this stuff. And which I think is funny when he bolts out of the house to run to wherever Doc's house is. That the dad says, "Lorraine, you ever have a kid like that? Yes. I'll never talk to you again," or whatever. And I'm like, well, she'll have 3. So, but it. Yeah. So anyway, so there's that. But he goes to Doc, and of course, Doc is as weird and as strange as you think he would be in 1955. But what I love is that Christopher Lloyd, he takes some convincing, and I love how Michael J. Fox in this exasperated moment just starts telling him, I know how you got that mark on your head. It's because you punched this into the time machine because today was the day you had the idea for the thing that makes time travel possible, the flux capacitor. And when he drops all that on him, that's just a bunch of gobbledygook. But it's the thing that, Lloyd's face when he opens the door back up, it's like, how do you know? And he's just doing that thing again, like you talked about, just that big acting. And it's so much fun. And then you get to watch Doc a little calmer kind of talk to Marty about it and figure it out. And, he starts laying out for him all this stuff about the future and that Ronald Reagan's president is a big joke. And apparently Reagan thought that was hilarious and loved it. Yeah. He's like, yeah, it is kind of, So, but I mean, really, it's funny to think about. I mean, we just had a reality star as president in this country. So like anything's possible nowadays, right? But in 1985, the idea of, or 1980 when Ronald Reagan ran, that was a big deal. Whoa. Yeah, exactly. So, but it's funny to hear all the jokes about it and hear him play it off. And you see Marty trying to convince Doc of here's what he's got to do, and he's like, I gotta have plutonium, and he's like, well, that's just not laying around, and he's not wrong. 1955, that would have been incredibly impossible to get a hold of.
They just didn't use it for anything back then. Those governments had it. Yeah, well, governments had it. It was the only one who had it.
And it would be in large quantities.
Small
you
little
couldn't
tube,
get it in the refined. Yeah, you couldn't get it in the refined power pellet that he was working with, and the whole 1.21 gigawatt problem. And I love this whole idea, though, that they know the Historical Society knows that the clock tower got struck at exactly this moment.
I mean, you can find that out easily.
He can. Yeah, but I love watching Doc do all the little faux calculations in his head. I'm like, if we do this, then you can get there by this time. And it's fun though, because it only works, I say, in this movie because they're not asking you to pull the threads on it and really discuss it. And because Christopher Lloyd is selling you on it so well that you just buy it. It's like, I mean, when they made a TV show out of this thing, like a cartoon or whatever, they had Bill Nye come on and do science stuff with Christopher Lloyd, which was really funny because Bill Nye would be like, yeah, so it really wouldn't work that way. And he's, doing the thing he always does, which is ruining everything that he talks about and making it not fun. It's like when Neil deGrasse Tyson tries to pull apart a Marvel movie. I'm like, shut up. I don't want you to do that right now. I just want to watch the movie. It's fun to watch Doc do it, and we kind of get with it.
Well,
it's cool.
You got to remember, in 1985, nobody knew what a gigawatt was, right? Well, they knew what it was, but nobody had seen anything like that, right?
Yeah, power workers did, but nobody knew in 1955. Nobody knew how
what's a gigawatt? We're talking, kilowatts at the time is what we're dealing with, and kilohertz and all that.
Yeah, well, just being able to spool that kind of power up was something we were only doing in this country at that. We were starting to do that in the 70s. Basically, we didn't need that kind of power draw in the 50s, at least not in the commercial sector. And so I love though that we have the 2 ticking clocks. We've got to get to the clock tower, but we got to fix the mom and dad problem.
Otherwise, there's no future to go to. Tower. Right? Yeah.
Exactly, right? You go back to the wrong future, which is a problem they will play with later on. And so Marty's problem is I got to get George to ask Lorraine out. So that, they kind of scope out the school, and obviously George is a huge loser, and this is never going to work. And Lorraine's cute, and no, you wouldn't put these people together. And what I love is how Marty keeps trying to convince him to ask her out. And he's like, no, nobody on this planet can get me to do it. So he puts on the hazmat suit. throws his little Walkman headphones on him, and rest in peace, Eddie Van Halen. Your band didn't want anything to do with this movie, but you as a Prince decided, well, I'll write you a riff for the flick with no pay and no credit at all. Writes this just jamming eruption thing that blows George's head off there in bed. I've always loved that little bit, and I think it's so much fun to watch Marty do the whole Planet Vulcan, Darth Vader, Eddie Van Halen riff.
I do too. I just love the fact that they drop all these, like, throughout the whole series, they'll drop these names. Calvin Klein. She calls him Calvin Klein because his underwear say that. Like, who wears underwear with their name on it? I don't know. You got, Reagan, starring Reagan in the movie, and Reagan as the president. You got, just all sorts of different things that they pop in there. So I really like that they do that. I think that's cool. Darth Vader, like, we'll talk about some of these inconsistencies and why they don't remember certain things a little bit later. But that was when I was like, well, why would you use Darth Vader? Why can't you just mix it up with something else? And,
But in 1985, man, there would have been no bad or dude, because you're like 2 years after Return of the Jedi. Yeah, it's all the pop culture that an 80s kid and the audience at the time would know, right? You'd know Van Halen, and what you knew about Van Halen was that if Eddie Van Halen started tearing off on something, it was going to get really crazy, and it was going to be incredibly loud. And if somebody from the 50s heard that, they would not know what to do with it, as we will see evidence later on, too. But it's all a big joke. And it like convinces George. He's like had a religious experience from this now that I must ask her out, and he tries to write her this poem and all this. And we get one of the coolest sequences when Marty's trying to get them to hook up at the diner or whatever the next day. And Biff comes in and intervenes, and then they kind of have the chase around the town square where Marty gets like the faux skateboard.
He invents the skateboard. As would be a...
Yeah, he basically invents the skateboard, right? And in that chase again with great Sylvester music, we see a common end for Biff as he winds up covered in a pile of dung after wrecking his car. But it's a great comedy moment, and it's a good action beat too in the midst of all this.
It is. I really enjoyed that. I love the fact that Marty intervenes on Dad's behalf, right, by tripping Biff, and then totally changes it from George-centric to Marty-centric with Biff, and they just have a real good scene. And I love the kids where they're on their, like, homemade scooters, I guess you would call it. I don't know what those are. And he comes over there and he just rips the top off and says, I'll be right back, and uses it, and they're all just like, whoa, look at him go.
Yeah, nobody would have seen that.
Of course, he's grabbing onto the backs of vehicles again and doing his little thing, getting away and all that stuff. And yes, the manure is the best. And I love that they keep that going throughout the series.
You've hit on something, though, too, that we've also now like given Mom yet another reason to be completely infatuated with this boy. He's nothing like anyone else she sees. He's so different, and he's just, he's such a dream. I think she says, all this, and I love watching Leah Thompson just fawn over him. And as an audience member, you're going like, you're watching a mother fall in love with her son. Like, this is kind of, it's a little weird, right? And it's supposed to make you feel uncomfortable, but the idea of like you could see why she would. George is a total wuss and doesn't do anything.
This guy's the coolest kid ever.
Everything Marty does is he's the coolest thing ever, right? He can do stuff nobody can. He's magic, right? I mean, and that's the whole point. And it all leads up though that we're gonna have this whole thing at the dance, because as it turns out, as fate would have it, the Enchantment Under the Sea dance, where the parents meet and kiss and all that, is the same night as the lightning storm. So Doc Brown's got his whole little setup downtown and there, and he's getting away with it. And Marty's going to take Mom out, and he's going to try to take advantage of Mom in some way. That got real
That's the best,
too.
though.
Like,
they did.
What are you going to do?
They did such a good job with that, too, because, he's all like, I'm going to be taking advantage of her. You're going to come in there, and you're going to tell me to get my hands off her and knock me out and this and that. But when it comes time to do it, she pulls out a bottle of booze and takes a swig, and he's like, "What are you doing? You should not drink alcohol." And he's trying to tell her, in the future, don't drink alcohol because you become an alcoholic. And then she pulls out a cigarette, and he's like, "You smoke too?" And then it comes time where she admits that she's been in car with boys before, and he's just like, "Oh my God, I can't believe this."
Yeah, you're having your mind blown, right? That all the things your mom harped on you about not doing,
yes,
she
and
did.
then it comes to the point of the movie where he has to do this now, and he's like, "I can't do this, man. I can't do this." And then she's like, "Come on, Marty. It's okay." And she goes in for the kiss, and the look on Marty's face and that's the best. She looks up at him while she's kissing him. He's like, "I think you might find this really weird, but it's almost like I'm kissing my brother." No, not as weird as you think.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That is all on those two. Again, Leah Thompson and Michael J. Fox play that perfectly together, where it's cute, but it's also awkward, and it says everything the audience is feeling in that moment. And just when you think like he's finally getting bailed out because here comes George to open the door, nope. Old Biff is back, and this is where things get fun, because now you're like, as an audience member, you're stuck into that moment. Like, no, the timeline's going to get screwed up. You can't, like, it's so tight. You can't mess this up. So they take, the goons take Marty off, throw him in the back of the car of the band. We'll get to them in a sec. And Biff goes in for some inappropriate moments with Lorraine.
He's doing what Marty was supposed to be doing, right?
To watch.
Yeah, and
yes, exactly. So George finally realizes what time it is.
He's not paying attention.
Rolls up, and this is the moment where you finally realize that George the thing that sets him off finally is that not only does he like Lorraine, he thinks she's pretty and all this kind of stuff. She's great, but he doesn't know anything about her, right? But it's the fact that this jerk is doing that and then pushes him down and acts like, "You're not going to get in my way and stop me from what I'm doing." I love the way Crispin Glover's face just turns blood red. He wraps up that knuckly fist.
But Biff has him like locked in, and he's like giving up, right? And it's not until he knocks Lorraine to the ground that he's like, that everything changes. That's when you see the face change and everything else. And just really good, really well done. And that's when all of a sudden she's like, "My hero," and everything from there.
Right. And then they go to the dance, but they still haven't had the kiss or anything. So we haven't set it up there. They're playing the band. They got Marvin Berry and the Starlighters, supposed to be Chuck Berry's cousin, playing. And they're playing kind of some cool, early 50s rock music, which is kind of neat. And they're taking a break, and they throw Marty in the back of the car, and it's just kind of a dropped line. These guys are getting high. I mean, they are in that car, blazing it up. They walk out, puffs of smoke. But what I love is that these tough guys in high school see these men stand up, and it's like, "Oh, we better get out of here. These are going to kill us." Like, it's just, there's just a difference of about 10 years there, and it's like, these guys have probably been in a lot of fights.
Yeah, you don't want that.
These little white kids. Yeah, exactly. So I love this. So they got to get Marty out of the thing. The guitar player cuts his hand, which I don't know.
Well, I think they were using a screwdriver to get the door open because the keys were locked in with Marty, and I think he slipped it, and it cut his hand as he was opening it up. Because he does play that.
I've always wondered what he did. Yeah. So they have to get back in there, and Marty's like, "No, they got to have the dance." So Marty gets to play guitar at the school dance finally, right? Wish fulfillment, right? Again, he's getting what he wants, but he's having to play like
Earth Angel,
not the song he would be playing. Earth Angel's a good doo-wop tune, by the way. That's an underappreciated little tune, but. He's playing. I've actually played that at a wedding before, by the way. So Marty's in there playing, and even some other, ginger loser tries to go and intervene,
yes.
For Lorraine, and George knocks out yet one more kid. Like, George has become, at the end of the night, like, everybody loves him, right? He's the hero. He knocked out Biff, and they're all having a good time. But that's when he smooches Lorraine, and all the people reappear, and it's the one effect that probably doesn't hold up is Michael J. Fox's starting.
Well, you gotta set that up too.
It's for what it was.
You gotta set it up too. As he's playing Earth Angel, and all of a sudden he can't play because his hand's starting to disappear, right? And that was the one effect that didn't work very well. And when he looks at his hand and it starts fading on him. It could have done a little bit better than that, I think. But, if it's the one problem, oh well.
It's actually probably the best they could have done in 1985. Like, you wonder, like, in subsequent times why they haven't tried to clean that up, but I guess it's just one of those no reason to change it now, things. But, yeah, well, I mean, what are we going to do? George Lucas everything and put some extra people in the back?
Lucas and Spielberg are tight.
Let's not do that. they are, but one of them doesn't do that, thankfully. Those Spielberg's monkey with some of his old movies anyway, too. But anyway, so they come back, they play the song, the kiss happens, and then we get the cool scene of Johnny Be Good. And I got to tell you, like, I remember watching this and thinking, and this is, again, before I started playing guitar, but I've now had 2 instances in this movie where I'm like, if this is what playing guitar is like, sign me up. I am down for it. And I remember when I learned how to play that song years later thinking, man, this song is freaking impossible. Why would you pick this out of everything that you could
show your chops?
But it's a I guess, man, but it's a blast, man. They're up there, and give it to Michael J. Fox, who does a really good job pantomiming along and stuff. And he's a guitar player, but he's not that. He doesn't do that kind of stuff. I mean, he lays out everything, man. You get Pete Townsend, you get a Eddie Van Halen, and he starts just tearing the house down. And what's funny is exactly what we talked about with the Eddie Van Halen tape is if you played your music for your parents' crowd when they were your age, they would not get it. Because it is something that is so just you.
It is. And I take a few issues with this scene, for one. First of all, he's playing a Gibson 335-ish guitar, which wasn't really around until 1956, 57, and the 335 itself didn't come out till 58. Johnny Be Good wasn't written till 58. Yeah. I guess you could play that off because
that's the point, though, is
they hadn't heard it yet, but still. Yeah.
Well, you got Marvin on the phone calling his Chuck, going, "Have you heard?"
And now
this?
Chuck rips off this kid playing at the dance for the music, right?
Yeah, there's something weird about the white kid teaches the black man the rock and roll. Like, that's a little that didn't play as well as maybe you want it to. But yeah, I like it, man. I've always thought it was a fun scene, and the fun part of it is when he finally hits that last note bend, and everyone has
staring
stopped,
at him,
and they're all just looking at him like, "What are you doing?"
I guess you're not ready for that yet.
Yeah, and great line,
but your kids will love it.
Yeah, your kids will love it. Yeah. Yeah, so we've got to get back, though. And the other thing that happened, we saw Marty writing it before, but now Doc finds it, is he's written this letter for Doc because he's trying to let him know, like, hey, look, you're going to get killed if you don't do something different. And Doc will have none of it, right? He tears it up. But I noticed this time because I've often wondered, I'm like, God, how in the world would you ever find the pieces of that letter again?
He puts it in his pocket.
But if you watch... Yeah. When he's doing it, the lightning hits and stuff, he sticks it in his pockets. And I'd always thought like he threw it away and then found it later. And I was like, oh, he had it on him the whole time. It just by happenstance, he shoved it in his pockets. And I don't know, it's neat to think about. You can also start doing some mind tricks with yourself is that you realize that like now that this loop has been created, you don't know when it happens, right? That this Doc knows he's got to hang on to that because he'll need it in 30 years. Like at some point he becomes aware of that. Again, you can drive yourself nuts trying to think about that stuff. But I do love the whole race at the end, and is he going to make it? And Doc's trying to pull the plugs back together, and it's perfectly timed that it's one of those like last second Looney Tunes. I slam them together just as the lightning hits, just as you hit the wire, the tripwire, and go back in time. And I wanted to ask you this though, because Marty comes up with the idea of like, well, if I go back like 20 minutes early, I'll have enough time to save him, right? Why not go back earlier than that? I mean, is it just because of Spur?
I don't know. That's a good question. I'm not sure why I think it was 10 minutes early is what he chose to do. But I think he probably figured he had enough time, not thinking that he stood there for 10 minutes learning about the stupid car, right? So it's not quite enough time. Right. But what I really love about that whole piece is when he goes, like, if it didn't work, he's crashing head on into that, whatever it is on the end there. Yeah, and what I love is that when he comes back, he crashes head on into that theater right there, and it's
exactly, yeah. So what I love is when he comes back, Hill Valley is still a dump. All right. Except for one place that we'll get back to in a sec. But he's got to get to the mall. So what's neat is that the car is dead. Like, it doesn't work, right? Like, he's out of gas again at the theater. So he has to take off running to the mall. That time machine, where does it go? Because it's still sitting there. Do they go pick it up? I mean, I assume they do, because
I would assume they do
back.
as well, because Doc has it, obviously, right? So I assume someone went to pick it up, and and they just didn't show that part of it. Who knows? Because you got to remember,
Hill Valley does not look like the kind of place you could leave a car.
But you got to remember that Marty wakes up in his house again, right? So someone took Marty home.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
so the doc probably took him home, went and got because he knew where he was going, right? He knew exactly where it would end up.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Actually, now that you say that, he's in the DeLorean with him when he takes him back home. So they do go get it. I just think it's funny that he leaves the car, and I'm like, this is not the part of town you would leave the car.
Nobody's out.
With the keys in it. Even if it's not starting now, somebody will get it started. Well, the bum on the seat was out. But yeah, so he gets there. He sees the whole thing go down again. We watched the replay at the beginning of the movie. And I love Doc's whole, like, what the hell? You know, and what's funny about that is you're like, yeah, the first time this happens, Doc has to make that choice. But at some point in the time loop of life, as it happens, he realizes, like, no, I really have to save that letter. And so he has to build the 1955 Doc that Marty's interacted with that puts that letter back together. You assume he does it the day after, probably. Right, realizes I now have to play out the next 30 years based on this moment. Like, everything I do has to lead up to that, and I have no more information than what I had before. So I just have to go forward knowing that I'm going to get to do this and that this will happen. But on this night, I'm going to wear the flak jacket and hope that these guys don't go for the head. And I mean, really, that's the gamble of all
it's
this.
It's a gamble, right? Anytime you're wearing a bulletproof vest, is you hope they shoot in the right spot. But because he didn't tell him exactly where he gets shot, so who knows?
Yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's interesting to think about, like, the 1955 Doc that we spend time with in the movie is now aware of things that he didn't know before. So he knows, like, I've got to make it to this night at that mall with that kid. I have to befriend that kid.
Well, do you think
somewhere on the way?
Do you think that he kept the pieces and didn't put it back together until 1985 like he was supposed to? Or do you think he actually put it together right away and read it?
I think he put it together right away, and because it's so aged and everything. I think he put it together right away and preserved it because it's got like a paraffin wax on it, and I think he did that to preserve it so it wouldn't fade and go away, and so he's got it to go forward with. And he spent a week with, I mean, again, it's technology he has no frame of reference for, but he will build all of it. So it's in his head somewhere anyway. So he actually gets to see what he's supposed to build 30 years before he builds it. So you wonder, like, did Doc also kind of go like, instead of blowing the family fortune, maybe I'll invest in that Apple computer thing and have a little bit of extra dough on the side. You never know, right?
But like, he's not told
that's one
how
of the things
it
you
works
wonder about
at all with Marty. He can see it, but he's not actually told how it works. So he still has to build it. So maybe he wasted his family fortune still trying to figure out how he built that thing. He knows what it looks like, but...
Well, my thought is, though, yes, he knows what it looks like, but it's not like he is a stranger looking at somebody else's machine. He's looking at the machine that he has dreamed up in his head, that he has dreamed of. He just doesn't have the parts for it yet. But now he gets to see how it works. It would be like if you took someone who invented something. If you took Edison earlier in his life, you took him the finished light bulb and let him have it before he actually got to it. The billions of times that he messed it up, that story that he failed 100 times before he got it right or whatever. If you let him see it long beforehand, he may not understand it completely, but it's in his head, right? So he's actually seeing the representation of what he's going to do. It'd be like, we've talked about Van Halen. If you took 10-year-old Eddie Van Halen aside and you played him Van Halen 1 and 2 and said, one day in about 12 years, you're going to make that. And it's probably in his head at that point.
Now he has to work towards it, right? Yeah.
Right? It's right. So it changes the Doc dynamic, though, because we never know why Doc and Marty became friends. We don't know how any of that happened, but what you can sort of loop in your head with the time loop part of this, the fun part of this of unraveling the yarn, is to go, Doc knows he has to become friends with that kid at some point, no matter what. Like he's got, because that's going to be part of their future together. It's, it's kind of a neat paradox. You start pulling at it too much, it will make you go like, it doesn't really quite all work. But it's sort of fun to have that, thought exercise to come with. What I think is funny is that he takes Marty home, and Lyon Estates is still kind of a suburb on the way down. But the McFlys live there. It's the same house. Like there's nothing different about it except the interior furnishings, which Marty wouldn't notice at 2:00 in the morning necessarily. But nothing else is different about anything except really successful people live there. And I've often wondered, I'm like, why would they live in the same place if they're as successful as they're supposed to be? Like something about that just has always been like, it would have been funnier, and they do play this in a later movie, if he went to that place and it wasn't
that would
his
have been
home.
pretty cool.
Like he woke up,
that would
like,
have been
"Who are
interesting.
y'all?"
I don't know. I mean, you would think that if they had the money, maybe Hill Valley is just a dump in general, and when they bought the house, it was a nice house, and they kept their part up, and the rest of the neighbors didn't. I don't know.
The neighborhood went down. It's the reverse of the Michael Myers neighborhood. That one house went bad, but everything else looks great, right? Everybody let it go. I don't know. It's funny, but it's neat to catch up with our characters again as successful adults. Now it's funny, Dave and the sister, they're still at home, or maybe they just came home to eat breakfast with the Rents. You never know. But I do think it's funny that Dave is like, I always wear a suit to the office, and I'm like, it's a Saturday, bro. Like I hate your job. I feel you because I've done that too. I'm like, oh man, Dave, I'm sorry. You gotta go to work on Saturday, man. Dang, that sucks. So, but yeah. I think that's funny to play again. You get George, you get his novel, which is basically his son, and and the Eddie Van Halen, Darth Vader moment that he's had. And I've heard it explained like this, and I think it's a pretty good explanation. It's like, how do these people not know, like years later, like that's our son looks exactly like that guy that hooked us up in high school, or with Darth Vader? Well, the writer explains it like this. Go ask anybody to remember a random 6 days of when they were in the 12th grade. He said they probably won't be able to tell you any detail.
I will buy that argument if it wasn't the time the parents met, the most important time that they in their life, right? So if it were any other time, I could totally buy that argument. And some of the details absolutely could be left out, no problem, right? Darth Vader probably wouldn't remember that name very well, whatever. But the person who introduces you to your future wife, you remember that. You just do. And the fact that you name him Marty, right? And he's Marty there. And then Calvin Klein comes around.
Well, now that one I could almost blow off as like, well, but I mean, how many? There might be somebody else in the world,
but makes underwear with the name on it. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It is one of those, again, you start pulling at that thread too much, Brian, and it will unravel in front of you. This movie is not infallible in that, but that is one of those things that, like, the more you watch it and you start play with that stuff, you go like, how does that not work? But the answer to it is because it has to. Like, that's the thing. And what's funny is that you see Marty, and that's why I said this movie is so weird, because our protagonist is the same person at the end as that he is at the beginning. He has no arc. He doesn't change at all. And for all we know, he's the same.
Well, he has to be, because he hasn't.
Yeah.
He's the only one who hasn't changed in the time, because he's the same person that he left as when he came back, because he's the same guy.
He
but
changed
not himself,
everybody else, but
and maybe
he changed himself.
He's supposed to change himself, but he wouldn't know that. Because he's the same guy traveling back and forth.
I mean,
it's not like he got left somewhere and then all of a sudden, boom, he's different when he comes back. I don't know, but
it's fun. It's funny to think about, though, right? So, but we do end on a great joke. I mean, that great Toyota 4x4 thing, right? that he's sort of lusted after in the opening scene. There it is. It's his truck. We see Biff, who's a total schlub now. I was like, oh, yes, sir, Mr. McFly. 2 waxes, no problem. And all that. And he's Jennifer's there, and he's just like, "Oh, I missed you." And she's like, "I saw you.
You act like you haven't seen me in a week.
Why are you freaking out?"
I haven't.
yeah, exactly. I love though that they end this movie on one of the best jokes ever. And I remember in theaters, man, thinking like, "Oh, what a cool way to end the movie." Doc shows back up. they've solved whether they were thinking about doing sequels or not at the time, and they all claimed that they weren't. They solved one problem. They're like, we got to get rid of this plutonium problem. So he's got like the trash compactor in the back now to run the time machine with. And it's, we got to do something about your kids. And I love the line of like, oh, where we're going, we don't need roads. And then the dang thing takes off. And I was like, that was the coolest thing ever. And again, seeing it in theaters and then seeing it years later on VHS and home video and stuff, you get that to be continued slide in. But when it came out, that wasn't there. So the movie flew right into Huey Lewis Back in Time, and that was it. And you thought that was the end of it. And it's neat to watch it now, knowing there is more to come, even though they've removed that out of some of the more recent releases and stuff of it. But it just ends on a big joke of like, let's go out here and we'll go out.
Yeah, I did like that too. I always, and of course, I saw it years later. Probably, I can't remember what year it was I saw the movie, but I want to say that 2 was either coming out or out when I first saw the first one, or that I can remember seeing the first one. So I knew something else was coming next. And you're saying that, what is there, 7 years between 1 and 2?
Yeah, there's 7 years between the first
92,
one and
the second one came out.
Yeah, when they made this movie, there was no intention to do it.
It's hard for me to believe that because they set it up so perfectly to have a sequel at the end. Even if the to be continued isn't there, they still set it up perfectly to go on a next adventure.
To hear Bob Gale and Zemeckis tell it. And they've told this story for years now, so there's no reason not to believe it. I mean, even if they've just decided this is the story or whatever, is that they wanted to end it on a joke. And they were kids like George Lucas, like Steven Spielberg, who grew up in the era of the 50s and 60s cliffhangers. And sometimes there wasn't a continuation, but you thought there might be a new adventure. And it was just the idea of like, it's an adventure movie, so let's leave on a joke and, let the audience walk away and go play pretend as to what that might have been, where they were going to. And it's only, I mean, again, when you watch it and that there are sequels, you're like, well, they're obviously setting it up. But I'm telling you, man, in 1985, that wasn't there. And we all walked out of the theater thinking, well, that was it, because we didn't think about sequels at the time. The only thing that got made sequels at the time, Brian, were horror movies. I mean, that was what Friday the 13th did. Like, good movies,
horror movies
didn't do
and
that,
Star Wars, right?
So, yeah. Well, but Star Wars was one of those, like, there were years in between them, and it was the saga and all that, crap. And this kind of movie you didn't do sequels to. You didn't do sequels to comedy movies back then. And if you did, they were almost always bad. Like, people just didn't do it. And there was usually years between them. And it'll be fun to come back and talk about part 2 and part 3 next, because they were made at the same time, essentially, because they made them back to back just to do them. And good story as to why they did it that way when we come back. But it's fun to watch this movie now and try to put yourself in the mindset of like, if there never was anything else, like what a great ending. It's a great, satisfying ending. You end on that, and again you go into a great Huey Lewis song, which is
great soundtrack.
Back in Time's a good tune. It's not as good as Power of Love, but it's a good tune. I mean, it's a great ending credits tune. You're walking out, picking up your popcorn, and going, "Wow!"
I agree.
Cool.
This is one of my favorite soundtrack of all. It's just a phenomenal soundtrack. They did a really good job picking the music. Huey Lewis really shines in this. I mean, this is really what made me like Huey Lewis's music, right? These 2 tracks, yeah.
That's what made everybody like it.
You get the sports album, and it's just gone. You're just Huey Lewis rocks, right?
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, and they'll tell you like they were trying to make that kind of music for years, and it just came along at the perfect time, for each other, and it worked. We're at the part of the podcast where it's time to give final thoughts, recommendations, and popcorn ratings. So, Brian, what are yours?
Well, I don't think it should come at any surprise. This is an extra large popcorn for me. This is one of those movies, like you said, Jay, we get out and we watch it at least probably once every 2 years, and most of the times every year for us. And it's just one of those that we really enjoy. My oldest really likes this movie, so he sat down and watched it with me for this podcast and really enjoyed that. My wife wanted to watch, but she's busy, doing this whole school thing. And so she didn't have the ability to watch with us, but we really enjoyed it. He's already looking forward to watching part 2 so that we can keep going, and he's excited about that. So yeah, it's one of those movies. And my other kids, the youngest really probably doesn't remember anything about this movie, and the middle kid just is like kind of like meh on movies. So yeah.
He's not into it. Well, I think that's funny though that you were able to share that with your kids, because I think I told you at the beginning, like, this was a thing for like me and my folks to go see, and I have such a distinct memory of it because, again, it's the first movie I got to go see, after the accident, and so I'll always remember it for that. And having been a kid who had gotten hit by a car in the middle of the suburban road, seeing that happen is like, well, okay, it worked out a lot better for Marty than it did me for a while. But it's extra large popcorn. I think we telegraphed that early on. This is in the top 5 of my favorite movies all time. Yeah, I mean, and it's because it's just so much darn fun. It's just a ton of fun, and it's also fun to kind of pick at the threads of it and try to wrap your head around, what does Doc know? When does he know it? And how does he figure this out? And how does that? And you can have those conversations all day, and I think that's what makes this movie fun, is doing that kind of stuff. But if you just watch it just to sit and watch it, like I watched it twice for this review, and the first time I watched it, I stopped taking any notes or anything. I just sat and just sort of let it wash over me. And this movie is just one you just get lost in, and it's a lot of fun. And it's rare to find something that has aged as well as this thing has. It's well over 35 years old at this point, and it's still as good as it was the day it came out. And they toyed around for years. There were all these talks about, they're going to do a reboot and all this stuff. And Zemeckis, Spielberg, and Gale have said, not as long as any of us are alive. And apparently Michael J. Fox has some control with the studio too. As long as he's around, they'll never do it. And honestly, I don't know how you could, because there's no fun in the idea of taking a kid from now and throwing him back in the 90s or the 80s. Like, it's not as fun as taking a kid from the 80s.
Yeah, it's not quite as big of a drastic change as it was from 80s to the 50s. I mean, that's a huge change in culture and everything.
The central crux of would I be friends with my parents, when they were in high school? The answer now is yes. Like, the kids are friends with their parents. It's just part of the culture which has changed, and that's what makes this movie so much fun, is that you realize they got it right the first time, and you can't redo it. And I like finding movies that I don't think are remakeable. Even though Hollywood will try to remake everything at one time, that's the old joke. There are some things that they probably won't, because it wouldn't work, right? It's just not going to be as good. It's funny, man, what this spawned, though. Again, this was a huge hit. You can't lay out enough how big making $300 million on a movie like this was in 1985.
Just go back and listen to our podcasts on 80s movies and listen to how much money they made and how big of a success that was, and then compare it to this. This would be like a Titanic type thing now, $1 billion revenue type thing.
Yeah, this was what, like, your major franchise, like Star Wars, made this kind of money. Nothing else made this kind of money. And now it's easy to take for granted every movie's $100 million budget or more, and it's got to make $500 million to make money or whatever. They made this for $19 million, which was a lot of money in 1985, but it wasn't so much that the studio was going to go down if they didn't make something out of it, and it made it back in spades. And just a great one and a fun one to revisit. And I'm really, really curious and interested to go back to these sequels, man, because like I say, it's been a good 10 years since I watched them. I don't have the fondest of memories of them. So I'm going to go with an open mind and try to see. But I've always said, just in talks with film friends or whatever, that this is one of the movies I always hold up as the example of did not need a sequel. And I'll be curious to see if I feel that same way about it after watching the next two. That, like, if you just watch this one, you're fine, Whereas some other movies, I want a sequel to it, but this one, I don't know. I don't know that I ever wanted one, but we got two, and so we'll talk about them in the coming weeks. Going to be a lot of fun. Always fun talking about them with you, Brian. Folks, you can find all of our episodes. Go to filmstrippodcast.com. That'll take you to the Anchor.fm site where you can find feeds to Google, Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, wherever you can find podcasts, that's where it is. If you go to our social media at FilmstripPod on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, you'll find our link tree. You can find links to all of our cool stuff, our YouTube page that we've started now. If you like and join, follow our Facebook page, you can check out our occasional Facebook Lives that we do with fun people that we meet around the internet and chat it up with, and also interact with the hosts there. We appreciate your support. So until next time, for Brian, I'm Jay. Thank you for listening to Film Strip.
Thank you for listening to Film Strip. You can find more episodes on our website, filmstrippodcast.com. The Film Strip theme music is produced and performed by Frozen Lake 121. All content used or discussed in these podcast episodes is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.